La verdad tiene uñas. Y hoy se destrozará estas paredes. The prosecutor's words cut through the thick atmosphere of the courtroom, and all eyes were fixed on him. The reporters, the jurors, and the spectators all stood still, their pens and pads of paper held in mid-air, as if the words themselves had fastened themselves around their throats. The trial of Mary Brown began at last. The courtroom itself resembled something out of a crime novel. Mahogany walls buffed to a shine, flags standing silently behind the judge's bench, the seal of justice looming overhead like an unblinking eye. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting hard white shadows that seemed to etch every expression, every nervous movement, every soft breath. The gallery was jammed. Journalists bumped into each other for the optimal shot, cameras exploding like quick flashes of lightning during a thunderstorm. The case had already gripped the whole country. Every channel, every podcast, every rumor column was shouting the same headline: the Secret Factory case. Some referred to it as the scandal of the decade. Others whispered that it was merely the tip of something worse. And at the center of the chaos sat Mary Brown. She had once been a hero entrepreneur, the kind of woman who rose from nowhere to the top of the business world. Her tale had been sung, her face emblazoned on magazine covers with headlines such as "The Queen of Industry" and "The Woman Who Built an Empire." Today, Mary resembled little like a queen. She was seated silently at the defense table, her pose too rigid, her back too straight, each muscle in her body seemed locked in place. Her face was serene, nearly cold, the sort of face that hid nothing. But her hands, they spoke for her. Tap, tap, tap. Her fingers tapped lightly against the smooth wood of the table, a near silent beat. To the jury it may have seemed like nothing. To lawyers it may have passed unnoticed. But to anyone who was paying attention, it was a tell. A tiny nervous fissure in an otherwise perfect mask. And then, bang! The judge's gavel crashed against the block, the report echoing like a gunshot. "Order in the court," the judge said, his voice stern but weary. "We begin." Silence fell. The storm outside the courthouse, the flashes of cameras, the frantic whispers, all of it seemed to vanish in that instant. The courtroom became a sealed chamber, a stage where only truth and lies would decide Mary's fate. The prosecutor advanced, his eyes sweeping the jury as a predator determines the size of its quarry. He was a tall man with crisp suit and sharp tone capable of cutting glass. Each statement bore gravitas, as if he had practiced not for days but for years. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he started, his tone low, measured and ominous. "This case is not a straightforward business of documents or bureaucratic mistakes. This case is not one of mismanagement or lack of care. No, this case is one of secrets." He paused, allowing the three-letter word secrets to reverberate in the room. Mary Brown established an empire. She had a crown of success. She was lauded, celebrated, and emulated. But beneath that crown, beneath that image of the successful businesswoman, she concealed something much more sinister. She concealed a factory. A factory not to produce products, but to hide crimes. And today you will learn the truth about the empire she worked so hard to conceal. The jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The crowd rustled. Even the judge sat forward a little, as though he too was trapped in the weight of the words. But Mary, she didn't budge. Her eyes were frozen on the table, unblinking, unmoving. The only noise was that soft beat. Tap, tap, tap. The prosecutor's finger pointed at her. "This woman," he explained, "employed wealth as a shield, power as a weapon, and fear as her currency. She thought that her secret factory would never be discovered. But it was. And the proof is irrefutable." Gasps spread through the gallery. Photographers snapped their lenses. Reporters wrote with frantic intensity, their pens scratching like claws on paper. Mary did not, however, glance up. Her attorney bent toward her, speaking in a hushed tone into her ear. Her lips curved for the briefest moment, smile or sneer. It was impossible to determine. But the drumming ceased. The judge gave the prosecutor a nod. "You may proceed." The prosecutor moved aside, sweeping his arm toward the witness stand. "The state calls its first witness." The big doors at the rear of the courtroom swung open, and a thin, pale, anxious man walked in. His eyes scanned the room as if he thought he would be yanked out at any second. He stood before the bench, shaking hands, extending to the judge to take the oath. As he sat, his eyes flashed momentarily to Mary. For the first time she cocked her head, and her eyes met his. It was just a look, a 3-second glance at most, but the impact was palpable. The man's shoulders stiffened, his Adam's apple bobbed, and a sweat bead formed on his brow. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor prompted. The man's voice shook. "Nathan Cole. And Mr. Cole, can you inform the jury how you are related to Mary Brown?" "I worked in the factory." There was a murmur of whispers in the room. The judge's gavel came down for the second time. "Silence or I will clear the gallery." Nathan held on to the edges of the witness stand with shaking hands. His knuckles were white. "I worked there for 2 years," he went on. "Originally I thought it was just typical work. Packaging, shipping. But then," his gaze shot back to Mary. She still hadn't moved, still hadn't spoken. But her glint was so intense, it could have been a knife held to his neck. "Then what, Mr. Cole?" the prosecutor prodded. Nathan gulped. "Then I figured it wasn't normal at all. We were advised never to talk about what we saw. We worked nighttime shifts. Always nighttime shifts. Windows were boarded up. No breaks, no questions permitted. If someone attempted to discuss leaving," his voice drifted away. "If someone attempted to discuss leaving, what occurred?" The prosecutor pushed. Nathan's lips quivered. He edged closer, voice falling to a whisper that still carried in the quiet room. "They were threatened. Some just vanished." The gallery exploded again. Gasps, yells. Reporters almost fell over each other, attempting to catch every word. The judge's gavel cracked like a war drum. Even as all this happened, Mary did not move. Her face impassive, her eyes unyielding. But for 1 second, just as Nathan glanced away, her fingers tapped again. Tap. And in that split second, every person in that courtroom knew. This was not any normal trial. This was the opening of something so much darker, something with claws, and it was going to rip through every wall they believed would hold. The prosecutor allowed Nathan's words to linger, allowing them to penetrate deeply into the jury members' minds. There were some of the jurors motionless, others furiously taking down notes, but all the eyes were glued to Mary Brown. It was an oppressive silence, interrupted only by the soft whir of the overhead lights. And then, with precise deliberation, the prosecutor moved towards the witness stand. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice hushed, "you said people went missing. What happened to them?" Nathan's throat bobbed. His eyes went flying again to Mary. She hadn't budged an inch, but her eyes dug into him with the ferocity of a hawk stalking prey. "I don't know for certain," Nathan breathed. "But one day they were here, and the next vanished. Their lockers cleaned out, their names wiped off the books. As if they'd never even been here." The gallery gasped. Someone in the rear yelled, "Oh my God!" Before the judge's gavel came down for quiet, the prosecutor nodded somberly. "No further questions, Your Honor." Mary's attorney jumped up from his seat, fastening his jacket with dramatic panache. "Objection! This is mere speculation. Paranoia born of fear on the part of a disgruntled former employee. My client conducts legitimate businesses, and she has never—" The judge halted him in mid-sentence, with an icy stare. "Save them for closing. You can cross-examine." The attorney sneered, walking towards the witness stand, like a cat stalking a mouse. "Mr. Cole," he started smooth as silk, "you say you worked in this alleged secret factory for 2 years. And while you were there, you deposited your paychecks, you signed your agreements, and you never once notified the authorities about these conditions. Isn't that so?" Nathan stuttered. I was afraid. We all were." "Scared of what?" The lawyer chuckled, turning dramatically to the jury. "Scared of my client, this woman?" He gestured toward Mary, who remained perfectly still. "Look at her. Does she look like some criminal mastermind? Or does she look like a successful businesswoman, being smeared by lies?" A murmur rippled through the jury box. For the first time, Mary allowed herself the faintest curl of a smile. Nathan's voice broke. You don't get it. She doesn't need to look threatening. Everyone knew. She was powerful. The lawyer moved in close, his voice barely audible, so that the jury strained to make out the words. Or perhaps, Mr. Cole, you just regret losing a good-paying job. Perhaps you and the others made up this tale for revenge. Nathan's hands trembled, his gaze skittering once more to Mary. She did not blink, did not breathe, only that cold, unreadable mask. Nathan breathed a whisper, voice shaking, I swear everything I said is true. The lawyer stood up, sneering. We'll leave that to the jury. He waved his hand in dismissal. No further questions. Nathan slumped with relief as the judge released him, but the harm was done. His words had shattered the polished veneer of Mary Brown's empire. The prosecutor did not lose a moment. Your Honor, the state presents its next witness. Detective Evelyn Hart. The doors opened once more, and a tall, authoritative woman walked into the courtroom. She was dressed in a sharp gray suit, her dark hair pulled back into a hard bun. In contrast to Nathan, she exuded confidence. Her eyes were piercing, her movements crisp, and when she stepped up onto the stand, the gallery leaned forward, as if anticipating fire. Having taken the oath, the prosecutor stepped forward. Detective Hart, tell the jury about your involvement in this case. She nodded resolutely. I was the primary investigator on raids relating to Mary Brown's properties. That includes the uncovering of the warehouse, now known as the secret factory. The jury all breathed in at once. This was the witness testimony they'd been hoping for. The prosecutor pressed a remote. The lights went down, and a projector illuminated the wall of the courtroom with grainy photos. The first was of the outside of the warehouse. Normal, unobtrusive. A faded sign saying Brown Distribution LLC. This building, Detective Hart explained, was listed as a distribution center for Mary Brown's business. On paper it seemed legitimate, but inside, the following slide flashed a cavernous interior lined with towering stacks of crates. Shadows collected between them, lending the image an almost haunted look. We found dozens of workers working in near darkness. No ventilation. No proper exits. No safety equipment. Conditions that violate every labor law on the books. Another image flashed. Rows of crates labeled with generic shipping labels. Detective Hart's voice turned cold. But what astonished us most was what was inside the crates. When we tore off the fictitious labels, there were unlabeled boxes, packed with undocumented material. Electronics, chemicals, even banned machinery parts. All smuggled, all hidden. Gasps burst across the gallery. The reporters wrote wildly. The cameras snapped. The prosecutor's voice echoed out. Detective, to whom did this warehouse belong? She swung her eyes to Mary, her face as sharp as steel. The trail of ownership took us straight to Mary Brown. Every signature, every paper trail, every secret account, it all pointed to her. The jury's eyes flicked over to Mary. She remained still, her hands folded neatly, a mask-like expression on her face. But those who stood near enough to observe caught the slightest shift, her fingers jerking once against the table. The defense attorney jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. The judge shook his head. Overruled. Proceed. The prosecutor nodded. Detective, in your expert opinion, was this factory intended to be a secret operation? Yes, she said firmly. Every aspect of it was constructed to conceal secret walls, concealed rooms, and multiple layers of shell companies for concealment of ownership. This was not sloppy. This was meticulous. And all of it leads back to Mary Brown. The courtroom hummed like a hornet's nest. The judge hammered with the gavel repeatedly. Yet order was hard to keep. The prosecutor allowed the jury to look at the photos for another moment before the lights increased. He strode slowly, speaking in a low but menacing tone. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just seen the hidden empire Mary Brown built. This was not a mistake. This was not an accident. This was deliberate. This was calculated. She thought no one would ever uncover it. But we did. He turned toward Mary. And now, her empire of secrets is collapsing, piece by piece. The The jury stared at her, anticipating a reaction. But Mary didn't blink, didn't move, didn't even flinch. Only her silence spoke louder than words. And in that silence, one question hung in each mind. If this is what she constructed behind the shadows, what else was she hiding? The courtroom lights seemed harsher now, almost blinding. After Detective Hart's testimony, the gallery buzzed like a storm about to break. Reporters whispered into recorders. Sketch artists furiously outlined Mary's icy face, and the jury shifted in their seats with the weight of what they had just seen. But Mary's lawyer, Richard Hale, rose calmly from his seat, buttoning his navy suit jacket with slow precision. He exuded the cool confidence of a man who had faced chaos before and walked away untouched. To the jury, to the cameras, he looked like a savior in a tailored suit. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, strolling casually toward the witness stand, "we've heard some dramatic stories today. Tales of secret warehouses, shadowy disappearances, crates stacked high with mystery goods. But let us take a breath and remember one very simple truth. Stories are not facts." He swept his arm out in a wide motion toward the projector screen, where the factory photographs still lingered. These photographs, they don't indicate ownership. They don't indicate criminal intent. They indicate a building, a warehouse, a facility where, yes, conditions might have been bad, but bad conditions do not make my client a criminal mastermind. The jury looked at each other. Some nodded weakly. Richard smiled, sensing his opening. He walked back to his table and rested a hand lightly on Mary's shoulder. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge him, but the gesture looked good for the jury. A lawyer standing by his client. He spun around at the prosecutor. "The state would have you think Mary Brown personally coordinated every aspect of this alleged secret factory herself. But where is the evidence? Where is the videotape of her on the inside? Where are the fingerprints? The voicemails? The receipts with her hand signing for orders? All we have is shadows, speculation, and convenient witnesses with motives to lie." The prosecutor grew indignant. "Objection, mischaracterization of evidence." The judge made a wave of his hand. "Sustained, Mr. Hale. Stay on questions." Richard grinned. "Of course, Your Honor." He turned back to Detective Hart. "Tell me, Detective, did you see Mary Brown in person while you were raiding that warehouse?" "No," Hart admitted flatly. "And throughout the whole investigation, did you find a single photo, a single video, a single audio recording, putting her physically in that building?" "No," she replied, gritting her teeth. Richard turned to the jury, spreading his arms. "You see, hearsay and paperwork. That's all this case is built on. My client's name appears on documents. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard of identity theft. You've heard of fraud. Big corporations use hundreds of shell companies. Anyone could have signed her name, used her assets, or created a trail to frame her. Mary Brown lived her life establishing legitimate business ventures. She is not some shadow queen." He left the words suspended, then plunged in the dagger. "The prosecution wishes you to find this woman guilty not due to evidence, but due to fear." The gallery stirred, a wave of uncertainty washing through the air. For the very first time, the scales appeared to tip, marginally, away from the prosecution. Mary sat motionless, her face unreadable, but her fingers no longer tapped. They were perfectly still. The prosecutor rose, furious. "Detective, please tell the court why Mary Brown's name appears on every single ownership document we uncovered." Hart straightened. "Because she set it up that way. We traced the accounts. The signatures were consistent. The money trail led back to her personal accounts. This was not an accident. This was deliberate." But Richard was prepared. "And yet, Detective, you acknowledge you never did see her there. Not even once. So we're supposed to believe that one of the nation's most successful businesswomen found time to directly operate an illegal sweatshop, in addition to operating her legitimate businesses, while granting public interviews, charity appearances, and appearances at events. Do you want this jury to think she led a double life out of a novel?" The courtroom erupted again. The jury seemed in doubt. The prosecutor snapped. "That's what we expect them to think. Isn't it because it's the truth? The judge's gavel came down. Order. Richard strode slowly, enjoying the moment. He wheeled around toward Mary. Your Honor, with your leave, I'd like to bring Mary Brown to the witness stand. The gallery exploded. Gasps, shouts. Reporters struggled to get their cameras ready. Mary's first public words since the scandal erupted. This was history. The judge paused. Mrs. Brown, you know you don't have to testify. Anything you tell them can be used against you. Mary finally stirred. Slowly, elegantly. She rose. Her heels clicked lightly on the floor as she walked towards the witness stand. She did not glance at the gallery. She did not glance at the prosecutor. She glanced only at the jury. 12 strangers now holding her destiny. Sworn in, she sat, her hands folded tidily in her lap. She spoke for the first time. Her voice was low, silky, and unnervingly steady. I have nothing to hide. Richard went cautiously, like a teacher coaxing a child. Mrs. Brown, can you describe your businesses to the jury? Mary nodded. I began from scratch. My first business was operated out of a garage. I grew over time. Distribution, manufacturing, retail. I had hundreds of employees. I paid taxes. I obeyed the law. All that I created in public. Did you ever sign off on an illegal factory? Her eyes went cold. No. Did you ever instruct workers to be mistreated or intimidated? Her voice sliced like glass. Never. Richard smiled warmly, addressing the jury again. There you have it. A woman who built her life with hard work, now brought into court because of shadows and lies. The jury nodded, their faces softening visibly. Mary's smooth, assured responses framed her as not a criminal, but a victim. But the prosecutor wasn't finished. He marched up to her, tone cutting. Mrs. Brown, if you were hiding nothing, why were the warehouse records signed in your name? Mary cocked her head, her lips twisting into a smile, so slight it was almost imperceptible. You're the investigator. Isn't that your job to determine? A shiver went through the hall. Bold. Daring. The prosecutor's teeth tightened. Don't you deny these are your signatures? Mary's grin never faltered. I sign hundreds of papers a week. Contracts, deals, bills. I can't be held responsible for remembering every document that comes my way. If someone signed in my name, it happened without my consent. The prosecutor slammed a photograph onto the projector. The signature circled in red. So this is forgery? Is that what you're claiming? Her eyes met his. Unblinking. I'm claiming, I'm not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Some jurors nodded. Others looked doubtful. But the seed had been planted. Maybe she was framed. Maybe the state didn't have the whole story. But in the depths of the gallery, a figure shifted restlessly. Tall. In a black coat, his face hidden under the lights. He had been quiet all morning, lost in the face of the press corps. But now, his eyes met Mary. And for the first time, her mask cracked. It was only for a second. A twitch at the corner of her mouth. A flicker in her eyes. But for Mary, who had been perfect marble until now, it was enough. A crack. Small. Barely visible. But real. And as the session drew to a close, one truth settled like a storm cloud over the courtroom. The defense was strong. The prosecution had fire. But Mary's secret was still waiting. Buried deep. And sooner or later, it would claw its way out. The air in the courtroom was different now. Heavier. After Mary's calm, chilling testimony, the defense had gained ground. Some jurors leaned back in their seats, as if Mary's words had softened them. Others seemed uncertain, caught between fear and doubt. But the prosecutor wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. He stood up slowly, his expression carved in stone. Your Honor, he began, his voice firm but cold. The state has one last witness today. The judge looked at his papers. And who is this witness, Mr. Dawson? The prosecutor's gaze darted briefly to Mary. Someone who can verify what the others only suspected. Someone who does know the truth. The courtroom erupted into a murmur. The reporters rummaged for recorders. Cameras snapped anxiously. Mary's lawyer stood immediately. Objection, Your Honor. This witness was not on the original list. The defense was given no notice. The prosecutor didn't flinch. That's because the witness only came forward this morning. For their own safety. The judge's eyebrows shot up. Safety? Yes, Your Honor. Dawson said. This witness has been in hiding. Afraid. But today, they found the courage to speak. The judge hesitated. Then nodded. Proceed. The double doors at the rear of the courtroom groaned open, and in came a tall figure in a black coat. The room lurched. The hum of murmurs swelled. Cameras flashing furiously as everyone tilted their heads to catch sight of him. His footsteps resounded down the aisle. Slow, measured, each one radiating a tremor through the hush. When he arrived at the stand, the bailiff swore him in. His voice was smooth, unruffled, but his eyes, they flared with something sharp. But the most telling response wasn't from the jury or the gallery. It was from Mary. For the first time during the entire trial, her mask slipped, her eyes opened, her lips parted ever so slightly, and the faintest shiver brushed her hands before she squeezed them tightly together. She knew him, and he knew her. State your name for the record, the prosecutor instructed. The man's eyes never wavered from Mary. Daniel Reeves. Gasps crackled through the courtroom. Some reporters whispered urgently. Her business partner. Others muttered. He disappeared months ago. No one could find him. The prosecutor moved in a step. Mr. Reeves, what was your relationship to Mary Brown? Reeves' tone was cold, measured. I was her business partner. At the factory. At everything she created. And everything she kept concealed. The gallery erupted into pandemonium. The judge's gavel came down over and over, but it was like attempting to muffle thunder. Richard Hale sprang up from his seat, anger blazing in his eyes. Objection. Outrageous. This man vanishes for months and comes back with allegations. He's not reliable, Your Honor. A ghost seeking publicity. But the harm was done. The eyes of the jury were on Reeves. And Mary's immobility had turned sinister. Too immobile. A cat ready to pounce. The prosecutor leaned forward. Mr. Reeves, explain yourself. Reeves never once looked away from Mary. The factory wasn't hers alone. It was ours. She was the face. I was the shadow. But every shipment, every employee, every threat, was screened through her first. No, Mary whispered. So softly the microphones hardly picked it up. Reeves' voice got louder. She planned it. She kept the workers quiet. She signed the papers. And when anyone dared to expose us, she ordered them killed. The courtroom exploded again. The judge pounded his gavel until the sound was like cannon fire. Order. I will have order. Mary sat forward, eyes blazing into Reeves. Her tone was harsh. A rock snapped against stone. You liar, you were the one who be careful. Reeves interrupted, voice low, but clear. You don't want me to say everything. The gallery stopped breathing. Even the judge rocked back on his heels, as if the air itself had changed. Richard Hale jumped in, attempting to wrest back control. Your Honor, this is nothing but a desperate man deflecting responsibility. Where's his proof? Where's his evidence? But the prosecutor was primed. He clicked the remote. The projector came to life with new photos. This time bank transfers. Offshore accounts. Signatures of both Mary and Reeves. Documents linking them not just to the factory, but something greater. The jury gasped. Mr. Reeves. Dawson queried. Why come forward now? Reeves at last tore his eyes from Mary and addressed the jury. Because I know I'm not only defending myself now. People have been injured. People have disappeared. And it's going to continue until the truth emerges. Mary at last lost her temper. She slammed her hand on the stand, her voice slicing through the bedlam. Yes, the factory belonged to me. The courtroom erupted in screams and gasps. The judge's gavel crashed frantically. But Mary's voice rose louder, more cutting, irrepressible. But you believe I did it for greed? For power? No. You don't realize. I was coerced. I was cornered. There's someone else. Someone you're too scared to say out loud. She scanned the courtroom, challenging anyone to meet her eyes. Some of the jurors ducked their heads. The reporters wrote furiously. And then, she smiled. A slow, chilling smile that turned the entire room to ice. "You think I'm the monster?" she whispered. "I was only the mask. The real monster is still out there, watching." The silence that followed was suffocating. The prosecutor looked rattled. Richard Hale looked furious. The judge looked shaken. And the jury looked terrified. Because for the first time, they realized this wasn't just about Mary Brown. This was about something bigger. Much bigger. And as Mary sat back in her chair, that smile still etched on her face, one thing became appallingly clear. The betrayal was only just getting started. The courtroom was no longer a courtroom. It was a battlefield. Reporters stood on their stools, straining to yell questions above the din of voices. Jurors leaned in to whisper to each other, their white faces shocked and strained. The judge's gavel came down again and again, but his authority was slipping through his fingers like sand. In the middle of it all sat Mary Brown. Calm, composed, deadly. Her words reverberated in the room. "I was only the mask. The true monster still lurks outside, watching." The prosecutor, Dawson, attempted to regain composure, his voice ringing over the din. "Your Honor, the witness and the defendant's own action affirm." But Richard Hale was faster. He pounded his hand on the defense table. "No, what you just saw was nothing short of desperation. My client is being cornered, attacked, betrayed by her so-called partner, Daniel Reeves. This is manipulation, not confession." The judge massaged his temple, looking tired. "Both of you. Enough." He faced Mary. "The defendant will be on her best behavior." Another outburst. "And I will have you held in contempt." Mary smiled only slightly, glancing at Reeves. Reeves fidgeted uncomfortably in the witness stand. For the first time since arriving, his self-control broke. He looked at the gallery, then Mary, as if some shadowy presence stood just behind him. The prosecutor noticed it, grabbed it. "Mr. Reeves." Dawson spoke softly, so the courtroom had to strain to hear. Precisely what did Mary mean? Who is this monster she spoke of? Reeves swallowed hard. His mouth opened then shut, his hand wrapped around the lip of the witness stand, until his knuckles were white. "I can't." The jury leaned in. "You can't," Dawson pushed. "Or you won't." Reeves' eyes flashed back to Mary. She didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Just sat there, that same smile curving her lips, her silence growing louder than any threat. Reeves shook his head. "If I say that name, none of us will be safe." The gallery exploded in gasps. The judge pounded his gavel until the boom sounded like thunder. "Order. I demand order in this court." But order was gone. This trial had evolved into something else. The prosecutor tried to steer it back. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've seen the evidence. You've heard the testimony. You've even heard the defendant herself admit her role in the factory. But understand this, whether she acted alone or with someone above her, Mary Brown is guilty. She built the empire, she enforced the silence, and she must face justice." Richard Hale was standing on his feet already, his tone crisp, enraged. "No, what you've heard is a circus. Half-truths, lies, fear-mongering. You want to discuss masks? Look at Daniel Reeves. He disappeared for months, and now he comes back conveniently to deflect all blame onto my client. And as for Mary's alleged confession," he waved at her, "it was forced in anger, not in truth. You cannot send someone to prison because of words spoken in the heat of attack." The jury looked torn. Some leaned toward Dawson, others toward Hale. The tension stretched so tight, it felt like the walls themselves might crack. Then Mary spoke again, but this time, her voice was soft, almost gentle. "You're all wasting your time." The entire room stilled. She leaned forward, her gaze scanning the jurors, the prosecutor, the judge, even Reeves. "You believe it's about me, that if you send me to prison, the horror is over. But you do not know. You've never known." She stood there for a moment, and in that moment the silence yelled, I constructed the factory on someone's orders. Every order, every shipment, every threat, none of it was mine. I was the face, the shield, the one who received the blame, while the true monster lurked in the background. And you want to know why I kept my mouth shut? Her voice lowered, a mere whisper that made everyone tilt forward. Because those who talk, disappear. The word lingered like a curse. Reeves winced. Nathan Cole, seated in the gallery, buried his face in his hands, shaking. Even Detective Hart moved uncomfortably, her hand reaching toward the badge on her belt, as if she reached instinctively for cover. The faces of the jury members were ashen, their eyes open wide. Some gripped their pens so hard, they became bent. And then Mary smiled once more. Do your worst to me, incarcerate me, declare me guilty, but it won't be able to halt what is going to happen. Because when the true monster enters this court, you all will recognize the truth. The judge, shaken but trying desperately to get a grip, spat, that's enough. Bailiff, take the defendant back to holding. The bailiff approached cautiously. But Mary didn't resist. She rose gracefully, smoothing her jacket, her smile never leaving. As she walked past the jury box, her eyes locked on one juror in particular, a young woman in the front row. Mary leaned ever so slightly closer, just enough for her lips to form silent words. You're next. The juror gasped audibly, recoiling as if struck. The judge barked, remove her immediately. The bailiff hurried her out the side door. But even as the heavy doors closed, Mary's laughter drifted back into the chamber. Low, cold and echoing like the toll of a distant bell. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. The prosecutor looked shaken, but he tried to push forward. The state rests its case. The defense attorney's jaw tightened. The defense will reconvene tomorrow. The judge, who looked worn out, banged his gavel. Court adjourned for 9 a.m. tomorrow. And let me remind everyone, this is not theater. Order has to be maintained. But even he did not sound so sure, because the truth was obvious. Order was lost, and whatever Mary was hinting at the real monster, it still lingered, watching. As the jury left, whispers swept through the gallery. Reporters rushed to write up stories. Nathan Cole hid his face in his hands. Detective Hart dialed an urgent phone call in the corner. Her voice hushed, and Daniel Reeves, he stood just outside the witness stand, his eyes fixed on the door Mary had vanished through. His face wasn't triumph. It wasn't even relief. It was fear. Gut deep, gnawing fear. As if he could sense Mary wasn't kidding. As if he could sense the true monster could be closer than anyone was brave enough to imagine. Outside the courthouse, flashbulbs popped as Mary was escorted into a waiting transport van. Her smile still hadn't faltered. In fact, it had intensified, if possible. And as the van doors closed, she leaned forward and whispered one last line, barely loud enough for anyone but the closest guard to catch. This was never my trial, it was theirs. The guard trembled, and somewhere in the distance, outside the courthouse walls, a shadow moved, watching, waiting to move into the light.